Most newspapers in Fleet Street for years have been using private investigators to do illegal things.
Well, some newspapers who have resources have over the years used what we call the practitioners of black arts, which is basically getting information that's not in the public domain. They have hired private detectives to go into people's rubbish bins, tap into people's telephones.
Some newspapers do bin jobs. Basically that means they turn up outside your house when you're fast asleep and feeling safe, and they empty your dustbin, take it away, rummage through it and take anything at all which will disclose your private business.
Well, I think that most news organisations have, controversially perhaps, two levels of decision making. One, should we actually record this information in the hope that we might recover some information? And that is done covertly and with the hope that nobody will find out. The second and more difficult question is, if you have uncovered evidence of really serious wrongdoing and there was no other practical way of doing it, can you then publish the evidence?
I think the main reason British journalists use these tactics is there's a lot more competition here. You have 10, 11 national newspapers. In the United States, in terms of national papers, as I understand, you basically have 2 or 3. So I think there's pressure to get stories, to break stories.
There's one particular story which the News of the World published where they quoted voicemail messages that had been left on Prince Harry's phone by Prince William. And either they were making them up or they had access to them. If they had access to them, I don't know how they could possibly have had legal access.
Well, the interesting thing about the case of Clive Goodman of the News of the World, who was convicted for hacking into the mobile phones of the royal princes, is that he paid out a lot of money, I think close to £100,000. And my experience of newspapers, or any newspapers in the world, is that if you're paying out that kind of money, it has to be authorised from the top.
No, I think that if we were to discover the whole truth about what's been going on, a lot of senior Fleet Street people would have to resign. A lot of Fleet Street people would end up being charged with criminal offences.
I think on the other hand, there are some stories, for example, the Daily Telegraph exposing MPs' expenses, and they paid £70,000 for a computer disk that revealed all MPs' expenses and that showed there was a massive public interest for doing it. Now, if that disk was offered to the New York Times, they would have probably said, no, we don't pay for stories, and they would have missed out on one of the most important stories in the last 10 years, which would have educated the American public.
The police and a parliamentary committee of politicians and various other people have said they will investigate to try to get to the truth. And what's really interesting to watch now is the extent to which any of those investigations are willing to try to get to the truth, because that means going up against and confronting Rupert Murdoch's news organisation, which is powerful.
Well, I think that this is an unfortunate case for the News of the World to take as a public interest case, because what it's doing is putting news gathering under the spotlight, putting it on trial, and what they're very, very much in danger of, in my view, is creating a precedent.
I think the problem with the new law is that I suspect it won't have that public interest clause. So then you have a problem of, as I say, going back to repeat myself, the issue of what happens when something is so ostensibly and demonstrably in the public interest and you can't touch it. That's the problem.